She was just a wildlife photographer, brave, wild, free. She lived alone, chased bears for a living, and didn't believe in fairy tales. But one stormy afternoon, stuck on a dirt road in Montana, she joked to a rugged cowboy billionaire, "Hey, want to get married?" She laughed. He didn't. He took her hand and said yes. This is the story of a woman who didn't need saving, and the man who followed her heart, not the headlines. The Wild had always called to Ellie Thompson. She didn't grow up with city lights or social media dreams. She grew up with the scent of pine in her hair, camera straps cutting into her shoulders, and wild wind brushing across her freckled skin. The mountains didn't scare her. The howls of wolves didn't raise her heartbeat. She found her heartbeat in those places, deep, alive, and unshakable. Montana wasn't just where she lived. It was who she was. While most girls her age planned weddings or booked trips to beaches, Ellie spent days tracking grizzlies or lying belly down in wet grass just to capture a perfect photograph of an eagle's wings slicing through the sky. Her camera was more than a tool. It was an extension of her soul. She wasn't chasing fame. She chased truth. Real moments in wild places. The kind of images that couldn't be posed. National parks and nature magazines knew her name. Her shots were raw and breathtaking, but fame was a whisper compared to the roar of a river in spring or the silent stare of a moose at dawn. She was self-taught, self-funded, and entirely self-made. The world didn't hand her anything, so she stopped asking. She was the kind of woman who didn't need saving. Until one stormy afternoon, the wilderness turned on her. It was supposed to be a short drive back from Glacier National Park. Ellie had spent 4 days alone in the forest, photographing a rare lynx. Mud still caked her boots. Her hands smelled of pine and cold metal from her gear. Her truck, a loyal but battered Chevy, rattled over the back road, tires slipping on the wet gravel. She was humming softly to herself, rain tapping a rhythm on the windshield. When it happened, Population A sounded like a gunshot, then skidding, sliding. The truck spun left, then right. Her camera bag flew from the seat. Mud sprayed across the windows as the Chevy finally crashed into a ditch with a heavy thunk. The engine gave a weak cough and died. Ellie gripped the wheel, chest rising and falling. She was alive, but stuck, and very much alone. She reached for her phone. No signal. Of course. She climbed out, rain slamming her face. Her curly brown hair clung to her cheeks like wet leaves. The wind bit through her jacket. She knelt by the truck, squinting at the tire. Shredded beyond help. "Well," she muttered to herself, "if the bears don't eat me, the cold will." Still she smiled, because what else could she do? She sat on the hood, hugging her camera to her chest, letting the rain fall. It wasn't her first bad day in the wild. She'd faced worse. Broken bones, blizzards, even a mountain lion once. She could wait. She was tough. But something inside her cracked, just a little. Maybe not because of the storm, but because she was tired. Tired of carrying it all. Alone. Then, like a scene from a movie, she heard it. The deep rumble of a truck. She turned. A muddy pickup was coming down the road. Tires splashing through puddles. It slowed, then pulled off to the shoulder behind her. Ellie stood, heart thumping, not with fear, but something else. Curiosity, a flicker of hope. The door creaked open. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in denim and leather, with a cowboy hat pulled low. Rain dripped from the brim. His boots sank into the mud like they belonged there. His skin was sun-worn, his jaw sharp. A faint scar curved down from his right brow. But his eyes, that's what hit her. Calm, steady, light blue, like the heart of a glacier. The kind of eyes that didn't flinch from storms. "You okay, miss?" he asked, voice low and warm. Ellie straightened, tucking wet hair behind her ear. "I'm fine," she said, flashing a crooked grin. "Unless you're a mechanic or a miracle worker." He tilted his head, studying her. "I can be both," he said with a smile. "Name's Clay." There was something in the way he said it. Easy, honest, like he didn't care if she laughed or believed him. "Ellie," she replied, cautiously offering her hand. His grip was firm, rough from labor, but not forceful. He glanced at the truck. Tires done. You got a spare? In the back, she nodded. But I left my tire iron. Somewhere halfway up a mountain, I think. He chuckled softly and walked toward his truck. Good thing I come prepared. As he grabbed tools from the back, Ellie watched him. The way he moved. Unhurried. Confident. Like someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. Clay didn't ask if she needed help. He just helped. And she, so used to doing everything herself, let him. That felt strange. Stranger still was the quiet between them. It wasn't awkward. It was easy. The kind of quiet two people can share without needing to fill it. Out here alone? He asked, crouching beside the tire. Always, she said. Photographer. Wildlife, he guessed. She raised an eyebrow. How'd you know? Only someone chasing something would end up this far off road with a camera and no spare iron, he said, glancing up at her with that half grin. She smiled despite herself. You always this smooth? Only when changing tires for beautiful strangers. It was her turn to laugh, and this time it wasn't from the cold. Clay changed the tire in minutes. No fuss, no boasting. Just a man who knew his tools and didn't mind mud on his hands. When he finished, he stood and looked at her. You'll be fine now, he said. But if you're smart, you'll follow me out. This road gets worse up ahead. Ellie hesitated. She didn't follow people. Never had. But something in Clay's voice felt different. Safe. Warm. So she nodded. He tipped his hat. After you, Ellie. And as she climbed back into her truck and glanced at him in the rearview mirror, something she didn't expect flickered in her chest. Not fear, not weakness, but the first spark of something wild and new. Something that whispered, maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do everything alone anymore. Clay Harper didn't live on the internet. He didn't care for emails or hashtags. His world didn't operate in DMS or conference calls. It existed in the lowing of cattle at sunrise, in the rustle of wheat fields bowing to the wind, in the creak of saddle leather, in the rich scent of turned soil. He was a man built from earth, not code. And Ellie Thompson, for the first time in her life, found herself captivated by someone not because of what he said, but by what he didn't. That day after fixing her tire, Clay stood by his truck and casually tipped his head toward the valley road. There's a little inn just down the hill. Warm food, decent pie. You hungry? Ellie hesitated. She never accepted help twice in one day, but the storm had left her chilled to the bone, and her heart somehow even colder. I could eat, she said finally. The inn was small and smelled of pine and black coffee. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and the waitress called Clay sweetheart, with a smile that said he'd been a regular since forever. They took a corner booth. Ellie unzipped her damp jacket, her curls still damp from the rain. Clay removed his hat and rested it gently on the seat beside him, like it was something sacred. The waitress brought them 2 steaming bowls of elk stew and a plate of cornbread. They didn't rush. Neither did the conversation. At first it was the small stuff. Weather patterns, trail routes. How Ellie managed to sneak so close to wolves without getting eaten. Clay listened. Really listened. Not like a man trying to impress her, not like someone waiting to speak, but like someone genuinely fascinated by who she was and how she saw the world. You ever been in the city? Ellie asked, chewing a bite of cornbread. He chuckled softly. For about 15 minutes once. Got a parking ticket and 3 panic attacks. Swore never again. She laughed, and something about the way he smiled back made her chest tighten. What do you do exactly? She asked, finally voicing the question circling her mind since the muddy pickup. Clay wiped his hands on a napkin, then leaned back in his seat. I run cattle, he said simply, and wheat. Mostly regenerative farming now, trying to give back more to the land than I take. That's rare, she said, and expensive. He nodded. So I bought more land. Helps keep things clean. How much land? He shrugged. About 500,000 acres across 4 states, give or take. Ellie nearly choked on her stew. Wait, what? He met her eyes, quiet and unbothered. I'm not trying to impress you, Ellie. You asked. Her fingers tightened around her spoon. You're a billionaire rancher. Clay tilted his head. Wealthy, yeah. But rich? He tapped his chest. Depends who you ask. She blinked. You don't have a watch. I got the sun. You don't post. I plant. You don't advertise. Not everything good needs a spotlight. And with each answer, Ellie felt a thread tug in her heart. Something ancient, something rooted. He didn't talk in algorithms. He didn't build apps. He didn't promise to change the world. He just woke up every day and worked the world, protected it, fed people from it, and in that quiet steadiness, she saw something beautiful. They talked for hours about the smell of rain before it hits the ground, about stargazing without a telescope, about what it meant to be alone, not lonely, but truly alone, with yourself and your thoughts. Clay spoke slowly, like every word had a weight. A man who didn't waste breath on lies or flattery. Ellie hadn't realized until that night how tired she was of people trying to impress her. Clay didn't try. He just was. And in that truth, she found peace. They began to see each other more. Not dating, not formally, just shared moments. A cup of coffee after a long trek. A ride through the hills on horseback. He invited her to photograph spring calves one morning, and she showed up before sunrise, her lens fogging in the dawn chill. When they were together, there was no need to fill the silence. It was enough to sit beside him, shoulder brushing his, as they looked out over a field rippling in the wind like golden waves. One afternoon, during a break on a bison photography shoot, Ellie sat on a rock, brushing dirt off her jeans. The sun was high. Clay stood nearby, one boot on a boulder, squinting out at the herd. She turned to him, grinning. So, she said playful, you ever think about settling down, cowboy? He raised a brow. She tossed a pine cone at his boot. I mean, you've got all the land, the money, the charm. You just need a wife who doesn't mind mud and early mornings? He smirked, looking amused. Know anyone like that? Ellie shrugged, pretending to think. Maybe, but she might be a little too wild for you. Clay stepped closer. Her smile faltered. Just a breath. Because something in his eyes changed. Deeper. Still, but fierce. I like wild, he said quietly. She laughed, flustered, and tried to wave it off. Okay, but seriously, want to get married, cowboy? She said it as a joke, a casual tease, a deflection from the way her heart had started to thump against her ribs like it was caught off guard. But Clay didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He stepped closer, took her hand, gently but firmly, and looked her straight in the eyes. Yeah, he said, I do. The world went still. The wind stopped. Her heart, untamable, fierce and always free, tripped over itself. Ellie stared at him, stunned. Clay. I've built everything with my hands, he said softly. But you're the first thing I've ever wanted that I didn't think I could build or buy. And she couldn't speak, not because she was scared, but because for the first time in her life, she wanted saving. Not from danger, but from loneliness. And in Clay's hand, she felt the promise of something real, something rooted, something worth risking everything wild for. For a moment, Ellie had thought he was joking. When Clay took her hand and said, yeah, I do, her first instinct was to laugh it off, to pretend it was just a flirty response to a flirty question. She didn't know how to handle a man like Clay, a man who said what he meant and meant it so completely. But the way he looked at her in that moment, it wasn't just desire, it was something deeper. Something that went down to the root of who he was, honest, unshaken, unafraid. He meant it. And even though she laughed and changed the subject that day, the words stayed in the space between them. Unspoken. Waiting. After that, their days became longer, richer, tangled in quiet intimacy. Clay invited her into his world, not as a guest, not as a trophy, but as a partner. He showed her how to ride with the sunrise, taught her to rope cattle with rough leather gloves and calloused hands. She fell off a few times. He never laughed, just picked her up, brushed the dust from her back, and said, try again, wild one. She photographed his ranch from angles no magazine had ever seen. Close-up shots of baby calves nursing, a silhouette of Clay on horseback against the blazing Montana sunset. She captured the raw, unfiltered soul of the land, because now she wasn't just visiting it, she was part of it. And she was falling in love with the man who had built it all, acre by acre, without ever needing a screen or a spotlight. But the world noticed. At first it was whispers in local papers, a few candid photos of them together outside the feed store, a blurry shot of them laughing by a pickup truck. Then the wildfire began. An article broke online. Who is Ellie Thompson? The billionaire rancher's mystery girlfriend. It went viral within hours. Ellie's inbox exploded. Emails from magazines, TV offers, old friends she hadn't spoken to in years resurfacing with empty compliments. Even her distant cousin reached out, asking if Clay had a brother. But it wasn't just curiosity, it was cruelty too. Some of it came like venom, disguised in politeness. "I just don't understand," one talk show host said on air. "Why would a man like Clay Harper, one of America's most eligible billionaires, settle for just a photographer? She's not even that famous," another said. "There are women with real influence. She lives in the woods." Bloggers picked apart her past, called her a nobody, said she must be after his money, accused her of faking her outdoor lifestyle for clout. They mocked her freckles, her wild hair, the mud on her boots. They called her unpolished, unworthy, unwelcome. And the worst of it came in the dark corners of the internet. Anonymous forums, whispered posts. "She doesn't belong in his world. She's just using him. She's not one of us." Ellie didn't cry. Not at first. But the words built up, like sharp pebbles in her shoes. Small, constant, unshakable. She began to doubt herself. Was she dragging Clay into something messy? Was her presence staining his reputation? He was respected, admired, even worshipped in some places. She was just a girl who took photos of bears and slept in a tent more often than a bed. One night she sat on the back porch of Clay's ranch house, camera beside her, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cedar and campfire smoke. Clay stepped outside with 2 mugs of tea, saw the look on her face. "Want to talk?" he asked. She shook her head. He sat beside her anyway. After a long silence, Ellie whispered, "Why me?" Clay blinked. "What do you mean?" She looked at him. Her voice broke. "They're right, Clay. I'm not from your world. I don't own designer anything. I can't host a gala or balance a checkbook without a calculator. I sleep better under trees than I do in bed sheets that cost more than my truck. I'm not glamorous or polished or whatever the hell they think you deserve." Clay didn't speak. He stood up. For a moment, she thought he was leaving, but then he turned, walked back inside, and came out holding something. A framed photo, one of hers. It was of a fox, mid-run, snow kicking up behind it, focused, wild, untamed. "You took this," he said. "I keep it by my bed." She nodded, throat tight. He knelt in front of her. "Ellie, I built this ranch from scratch. I've met everyone you can imagine. Bankers, CEOs, politicians, influencers. I've shaken more hands than I care to remember. And not one of them has ever made me feel the way you do when you laugh after falling off a horse or cry at a wolf's howl." She looked down, but Clay took her chin gently and lifted her gaze. "You don't belong in their world, Ellie," he said softly, "but thank God for that, because you belong in mine." She blinked, tears spilling silently. He took her hand again. "I don't care what they say. The only people I listen to are the ones who know how to respect a good woman and a strong heart. And you've got both. In spades." Ellie threw her arms around him and buried her face in his shoulder. She didn't need saving, but in that moment, he gave her something even more powerful. He saw her, all of her, the dirt, the fight, the fear, and the fire. And in the arms of the man who spoke to the earth instead of the world, she found shelter, not from judgment, but from doubt. The firestorm roared on, but Ellie and Clay, they stood inside it, together. Texas was wide and golden when they arrived, but Ellie felt a storm in her chest. Clay held her hand as they stepped out of the truck in front of the Harper family ranch. A sprawling estate with white pillars, wraparound porches, and fences that looked polished enough to belong in a magazine. The Harper name meant something here. This wasn't Montana's quiet simplicity. This was old money, old roots, and older expectations. Clay's brother Weston met them at the steps. He had Clay's eyes, but none of his softness. His handshake with Ellie was firm, dry, and cool. Not cruel, just cautious. "Ellie," he said, nodding, "we've heard a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," she tried to joke. He gave a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Time will tell." Inside, the home smelled like lemon oil and mahogany. Clay's mother, Margaret Harper, stood in the sitting room, every hair in place, pearls gleaming against a pale blue blouse. She welcomed her son with open arms. When Ellie stepped forward, Margaret's embrace was more of a pause, a kiss of air on the cheek, politeness wrapped in distance. "Clay always did like unique girl," she said, gesturing for tea. "Artists, poets, that ballet dancer from New York." Ellie smiled tightly. Later, over dinner, the air thickened. Margaret asked questions wrapped in compliments that cut like knives. "So, Ellie, do you plan to continue this wildlife photography as a lifestyle? Or is it more of a hobby you might outgrow?" Clay's fork stopped midair. "I've made a career out of it," Ellie replied calmly. "My work's been published by National Geographic and the Smithsonian. I've led conservation projects in Alaska, Wyoming, and—" "Oh, that's lovely," Margaret interrupted with a tight smile. "So adventurous. Not exactly some stable, but very free-spirited," Weston chimed in. "And what exactly drew you to Clay? The horses or the hundreds of thousands of acres?" Ellie blinked. Clay stiffened beside her, but she didn't fight back. She simply placed her napkin on the table and excused herself. Outside, the Texas night spread out above her. The stars were different than Montana's. Brighter, maybe, but somehow colder too. She sat beside the stables, where the scent of hay and sweat felt more honest than anything in that house. She had faced wolves before, literally, grizzlies, blizzards, landslides, but nothing had prepared her for this, being treated like she didn't belong in someone's family, like she was less, like love had to pass an interview. Clay found her there sitting on a hay bale, her arms around her knees, eyes glossy from holding too much in. He didn't say a word at first, just knelt beside her, and for once the man who always had answers looked heartbroken. "I didn't think they'd be like this," he said quietly. "I knew they were proud, but this? I'm sorry, Ellie." "It's not your fault," she whispered. "I should have warned you. Should have." "I thought I was strong," she said, cutting him off. "I can sleep under snow. I can cross rivers on foot. I can stand still while wolves circle me. But your brother's words, your mom's looks," she let out a trembling breath, "they made me feel small." Clay's jaw clenched. "You are not small." She laughed bitterly. "I don't belong in that house." He touched her hand. "That house doesn't define us." Ellie looked at him, eyes filled with something between ache and love. "I don't want to be the reason you fight with your family." Clay shook his head. "I've built fences that held back stampedes. I can build boundaries with people who are supposed to love me unconditionally." She stared at him. The fire of fear flickered behind her eyes. The fear of never fitting in, of always being almost enough. "You really mean that?" she asked softly. Clay reached into the pocket of his denim jacket and pulled out a small, leather-bound box. He opened it. Inside was a ring unlike any she'd seen before. It wasn't glitzy or oversized. It was simple, silver and turquoise, carved with mountain ridges and a wolf silhouette. Handmade, honest, wild, like her. "Marry me, Ellie," he said, voice low and raw. "Not because it's easy, not because it makes sense to anyone else, but because it's right. You're the realest thing I've ever known. You don't have to earn a place. You already have one." In me, she stared at him. Her throat tightened. She wasn't a woman who cried easily, but in that moment, tears spilled freely. No one had ever asked her to stay when things got hard. No one had ever chosen her in front of judgment and tradition. Ellie wasn't used to love that stayed and fought. "I don't need perfect," she whispered. "I just need real." Clay kissed her hand. "Then we're already there." And under the stars of a Texas sky that had once felt cold, Ellie said yes, not just to him, but to herself, to love that defied comfort zones, to being seen, to being enough. The wedding wasn't grand, it wasn't meant to be. There were no five-tier cakes, no gold-trimmed invitations, no designer gowns flown in from Paris. There was only wind in the grass, a handful of friends who truly knew them, and a sky that stretched wide over Montana's untamed heart. They married in a sun-drenched valley behind Clay's ranch. Beneath an arch of hand-carved timber wrapped in wildflowers Ellie had picked herself that morning. No spotlight, no press, just them. Ellie wore a simple cream dress that fluttered in the wind. Her hair was down, wild and free, a braid of sage tucked behind one ear. Clay wore the same leather boots he'd fixed fences in, a clean shirt, his old belt buckle. The look in his eyes wasn't nervous. It was steady, unshaken, like he'd known all along they'd end up here. The horses stood at a distance, grazing, quiet witnesses to a promise that didn't need a cathedral to be holy. They wrote their own vows. Clay went first, his voice rough but clear. "You walked into my life like lightning, Ellie Thompson. No warning, no permission, just real. I thought I had everything figured out, but you reminded me that the earth isn't something you control, it's something you walk with. And I want to walk with you. In every storm, through every season, I vow to never silence your wildness, only to protect it. You're not a visitor in my world. You're its center now." Ellie blinked fast, tears catching in her lashes. She took a breath, held his hand tighter. "You never tried to rescue me, Clay Harper, and that's why I love you. You saw me. Every scar, every sharp edge, every muddy boot. And instead of pulling me out of my chaos, you knelt down in it beside me. I vow to love you without conditions, to fight with you, not against you, to trust the quiet between us, and to always remind you that your worth was never in your land or money, but in the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." They kissed under the open sky as the wind rustled the grass and the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. Unrehearsed, wild, perfect. No applause. Just the sound of a world settling into something right. But the quiet didn't last. Despite their efforts to keep the ceremony private, someone had taken photos. A ranch hand's girlfriend posted a few images online. A shot of Clay tying a hand-woven bracelet around Ellie's wrist instead of a ring. The kiss under the arch. Ellie barefoot in the field laughing as the sun dipped behind the hills. Within hours, the internet caught fire. The story ran wild. Billionaire rancher marries reclusive wildlife photographer in Barefoot Valley ceremony. No diamonds, no drama. Clay Harper's unorthodox love story. Who is Ellie Thompson, and why are women everywhere crying over this wedding? But the world, as always, was split. Some mocked it. They said it looked cheap, too plain, like a hippie retreat. Commenters rolled their eyes. Another billionaire trying to act humble. Others went after Ellie again. Still doesn't belong in his world. One popular social media post read, "That's not a wedding. That's a camping trip with vows." But there was something different this time. Because many others, thousands, saw what mattered. They saw the rawness, the joy, the honesty in Clay's eyes, the pride in Ellie's. They saw something true, and the world, tired of perfection and plastic love, clung to it. Ellie hadn't planned to speak out, but when a young girl messaged her saying, "Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't have to look like the movies," she knew she had to. So she wrote, not just about their wedding, but about the weight of judgment, about what it meant to be a woman with dirt under her nails and a sharp mind in a world that tried to make her choose one or the other. She wrote about growing up in a white middle-class town that preached progress but whispered prejudice behind closed doors, about how even privilege has layers and how assumptions, even among your own, can cut deepest. She told the world, "You don't have to be poor to be underestimated. You don't have to be of a different race to experience bias. Sometimes the strongest women get silenced simply for being different from the box they're put in." Clay stood beside her at every turn, not as her shield, but as her echo, supporting, not speaking over. Together, they redefined what a power couple could look like. No glitz, just grit, no scripts, just truth. People started listening. Publications once dismissive began to quote her essays. Schools invited her to speak. Women who'd felt not enough for love, work, or society sent thousands of messages. And slowly, hearts softened. The wedding that wasn't enough became a symbol of choosing each other even when the world raised its eyebrow, of how sometimes love that whispers loudest is the one that stays longest. Time didn't slow down for Ellie and Clay, but they learned how to walk with it, hand in hand, through rain and sun, through hard seasons and healing ones. And while their love stayed quiet and grounded, its impact grew louder in the hearts of those who watched it unfold. They didn't want fame, they wanted change. So they built something that the world couldn't ignore. Not a luxury resort, not a spa retreat, but a sanctuary, a real one. Wild Heart Ranch, a place carved from the same land that had once brought them together. Tucked in the valleys of Montana, hidden by ridgelines and watched over by hawks, it became a home for healing, for kids who had never been seen. Not really. It started with 6 children, then 12, then more. Black, white, Latino, Native, Asian, immigrant, poor, middle class, forgotten. Kids with broken homes and kids with full houses but empty hearts. Kids who had been laughed at for their accents, ignored for their skin color, bullied for how they dressed or prayed. Girls told they weren't tough enough. Boys told they couldn't cry. Clay taught them to ride horses, to read weather from the clouds, to repair fences, to find peace in open spaces. Ellie taught them how to see the world through a lens, not just the camera kind, but the kind that notices light where others see shadows. She handed them cameras and told them, don't just look, witness. They learned how to capture a sunrise on film, how to track a deer without disturbing it, how to plant seeds with care, and how to trust people again, one smile, one honest word at a time. The ranch became a second chance for hundreds of children. No uniforms, no phones, no filters. Just dirt, sky, animals, and the slow, soul-deep magic of being chosen when the world had looked away. Some kids went back to their schools changed, more confident, more kind. Some stayed longer. Some came back as counselors. One native boy, David, who had barely spoken for his first 3 weeks, grew up to become a wildlife biologist. Another girl, Mila, once called trouble by every teacher she'd known, returned 4 years later as a guest speaker to tell new kids, you are not your past, you are becoming. News outlets who once called Ellie and Clay odd, misfit, and unlikely now called them visionaries. But they never let it go to their heads. One day, a reporter from a national magazine came to write a feature on Wild Heart Ranch. He watched Clay patiently show a refugee child how to saddle a horse. He followed Ellie as she helped a young girl photograph a fox den without scaring the mother away. At the end of the day, over coffee and crackling firewood, the reporter asked Ellie, did you ever imagine your life would look like this? Ellie smiled. Not the polished kind for press, the real kind. The kind that came from knowing you'd fought to become who you were. She leaned back in her chair and said, it started with a joke. The reporter blinked. A joke? She nodded. I asked Clay if he wanted to marry me. I was just teasing, but he didn't laugh. He said yes. And that one strange moment, it turned into the best kind of truth. Clay walked in then, dirt on his jeans, a child asleep on his shoulder. He kissed Ellie's forehead without saying a word and carried the boy to bed. The reporter didn't ask anything else. He understood. Because some stories don't need explanation. Just witnessing. In a world obsessed with perfection, Ellie and Clay had chosen love that was honest. In a society still healing from wounds of class, race, pride, and fear, they didn't preach. They built. They showed what it meant to stand beside someone. Not above, not behind. To listen, to unlearn, to open arms and fences both. And as the sun set over Wild Heart Ranch, the wind rustling through the tall grass and laughter echoing from the barn, it was clear. The woman who didn't need saving and the man who never asked to be followed had saved more than just each other. They'd saved a piece of the world, one child, one truth, one unexpected love at a time. Love, real love, breaks past judgment, status, and pride. Whether it's color, class, or job titles, none of it matters when two hearts meet with honesty.